Mel Brooks's lawyer, a fellow by the name of Alan Schwartz.
May the Schwartz be with you.
Yeah, that comes literally from Alan.
Is that?
And Alan's in a couple of Mel's movies. I mean, you see him. He's this lawyer.
I love it when things come together.
No. That's definitely May the Schwartz be with you comes from Alan.
Okay, I guess we'd have to do some sort of an intro, right? Welcome to the podcast.
This is up to you. I'm going to let you. I'm going to let you do the intro for this podcast.
No, this is our podcast. Welcome.
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to talk about things. So
I think we're going to talk about things related to film, but they don't only have to be specific to any movies. But there are movies that I've made. There are movies that you're interested in. There are movies we can talk about, and there are other things relating to the business and the background of movies.
Maybe just life in general. Because I feel like movies can be that thing that have that little bit of fantasy, but they also resonate with us because they, we share stories or experiences with the characters. And I think the behind the scenes stuff is interesting because, making the movie from a technical aspect, I don't think we'll dig in too much, but just like what I always like hearing from you, for instance, is the way that The Elephant Man started as a movie.
Well, it's an interesting story. I think I told you I wrote a book about it.
Yeah,
it was called. It was a personal memoir, just called "Making the Elephant Man," and the whole idea of it was that I went from I had been a production manager before The Elephant Man. I had been an AD, assistant director. So I'd worked in the business. I was around the business, and I had worked with Mel Brooks. I was his first assistant director on High Anxiety. And we became good friends, during the making of the picture. And he had asked me after we finished if I would work with his wife, who was going to be directing her first movie. As it turned out, it was the only movie she directed. She really wasn't interested in directing after that experience.
Did that go anywhere? What movie?
It was the movie's called Fatso. It was with Don DeLuise.
Oh yeah, it's on here.
And she was in it.
Okay,
she starred in it, but he was the main star, and it was fun, and we had a good time. And I basically was producing it and honored her need. She wanted, and she had made a short film at the AFI in the AFI Women's Workshop, and as a result of that. This was an expansion of that. She wrote it out as a full feature. And
so even though she was Mel Brooks' wife, she still went to film school.
Well, she kind of. I mean, she didn't go to film school, but she got to direct a short film at AFI, which had nothing to do with, and she learned a lot about the process of doing it, although she was more interested in it from the standpoint of the performances, the actor stuff. She wanted, she made it very clear when she sold the idea to 20th Century Fox, and they decided they would produce a feature with her directing it. So it was an expansion, basically, of what had been a short film. She started over again, and she wanted a lot of women on the crew. She wanted the crew to be comfortable to her and people that she liked. And
this is in what, 80?
This was probably, let me think, it had to be, no, this was in the 70s, actually, late 70s, probably 78, 79. And because it was just after High Anxiety, so it wasn't too much later. And in any event, I hired, there were very, very few women in major positions on film crews. They just weren't, and mostly you'd have men. It was unusual for me, and then I hired a gaffer, for example, the guy who sets the lights, and all that. I hired a gaffer, and he brought in a couple of electricians with him, two of which were women, which was like nobody. I mean, unheard of. I mean, and these, they were great. I mean, they could climb, climb scaffolding and do anything that any guy could do. They were great, but it was just unusual. We had a set decorator. Our lead set decorator was a woman, and our camera person was a woman. And there was
and
of course the director was, but the camera person was a woman named Brianne Murphy. And at the time, she was maybe one of 2 or 3 women camera people in the business. There weren't anybody else. So getting her was, was a big deal. I mean, not that she had a lot of other work, but it was great, and she did a very good job. She was excellent, but it was unusual for all of us because very few people had worked on sets that were shot by female directors of photography. Anyway, make the long story short.
Well, real quick, did you go to film school?
I did. I went, but I went to graduate school in communications with a major in film. So
it wasn't a dedicated.
It wasn't dedicated to film. And while I was in it, I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was at the Annenberg School of Communications, which had just started maybe 2 years before I was in it. And I was doing, most of it was theoretical. It wasn't practical stuff. But we did have a film lab, and we made documentary films in the film lab. But one of the things about the documentary films was you weren't allowed to use sync sound. So you could, and you had all these limitations in the documentaries that you got to make. So it was unusual. Well, I was interested in feature films, and I was interested in movies. So I wound up, while I was in graduate school, one summer I went out to SC here in California and took a heavy course in basically during which I made a film in the course, but it was a training and it was very basic stuff. It wasn't theoretical
learn
at all.
As you do kind of thing.
It was like, you would learn editing, you would learn
by
shooting, doing it, but you would also have mentors and other people around who would help you and learn stuff. So that was really how I.
And then how'd you end up meeting Mel?
Well, I met Mel through a friend of mine who I had known back before I came out to California, who has become a well-known director named Barry Levinson. Mm-hmm. Barry was from Baltimore, Maryland, and my wife was from Baltimore, and they knew each other and grew up together. And Barry, when he came out I met him right before he came out to L.A., and he said he was going out to L.A. to see if he could break into the business somehow. Yeah. So, okay. So he came out to L.A., and immediately he wound up doing a comedy routine with another guy, and they would perform in different places in and around L.A. And ultimately, they wrote a lot of material together, and he got noticed as a writer, and they started to think about writing screenplays. Ultimately, his partner left, and he wound up Barry left, and Barry teamed with some other guys, and they began to write sketch comedy. And they wrote for the Carol Burnett show. Ultimately, I mean, there were a couple of other things they did before that, but they actually got a writing gig on the Carol Burnett show. As a result of that, somehow they had an idea for a movie, and Mel Brooks was interested in doing it. So he hired them and worked with them together to create this movie, which was High Anxiety.
Oh, great.
So that was
what did they say? We need this guy as an AD on this thing? Or
well, Barry introduced me to Mel. He said, hey, Mel needs an AD.
You were not ADing yet, or were you?
I was already in LA. I was working. I had come out from New York, and I was working on a television series. The series was called the Blue Night series. I got a job as an assistant director.
Oh, so you were okay. So
I worked as an AD for a while on the Blue Night series, which was based on there was a miniseries that was done with William Holden, and then when they did it as a regular series, they brought in George Kennedy was the actor, and he was the lead, and I was the first AD on it. I mean, they were alternating firsts. You usually had two firsts on a series, so that one first AD would work 7 days, and then, which would be the shoot, 7 days. And then I would be off prepping the third show while another AD would come on and do the second show. So every other show, I was the AD on.
So for those who don't know, an assistant director is really you're not directing, you're kind of keeping track of the schedule and the call times and when, moving the shoot forward, right?
And basically, you are managing the day of shooting, and the next day you have to plan what's going to happen. You have to plan on the day what you're going to shoot, what the order is going to be, when you're going to do it, when the actors need to be there, how to, make sure they're on the set at the right time, all of that kind of
It's really
stuff.
good practice for producing.
It is. It's actually, it is actually much closer to producing than it is to directing.
Yeah.
But some assistant directors become directors because they're standing next to directors and they watch what they do and they learn. And I did that too. So, I mean, I was actually more interested in directing in those days than I was in producing, because that was, I thought, the most creative aspect that would really exercise my creative muscle, whatever
that was my thought too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd been an actor actually in high school and college. I did a lot of acting. So
that's funny. That's common. My idol in show business was always Jim Carrey, and I thought I was going to be a Jim Carrey kind of actor, and that's what got me interested initially. And then I realized that I like the problem solving and the putting things together to make little videos. So I thought, well, this whole directing thing and editing and shooting, filmmaking was fun too.
Yeah.
And then I really only learned what a producer does once I came to LA. I didn't really know the difference.
Oh, I didn't either. I mean, the truth is, the hard thing to explain to people, very few people know what producers do.
Yeah.
There's often numerous producers on a movie, and usually there's only one of them who's really, really involved in the day-to-day mechanics of the whole shoot, and the rest of them could be the actor's lawyer, the best friend of some. I mean, they're people that are
the producer of a film is really the person who gets the thing going, right?
Usually.
I mean, it could be a writer who wants to hook up with a producer,
but it could be a lot of things. I mean, very often you may find someone who had a great idea and didn't know how to get it going, and so they'd bring it to you. It might not be your idea, but it might be somebody else's, and they come and say, how do I get this made? And because you've had contacts within the business, you figure it out, you do it.
It's kind of similar in music too. You might be a talented singer or whatever, but if a good producer can help you create a brand and a sound and do it right, then that can,
Well, I think a lot of it is, the one thing I would say about producing is that there are as many different ways to produce as there are, it's not like there's one way to go.
Yeah.
So that very often somebody comes up with a great property, a great idea, book. They buy the book and they become the producer, but they don't know anything about making the movie, so they have to hire somebody else who does.
Right.
So that then brings in another producer. Right. Now, what my instinct was because I started at the bottom, I worked as a production assistant. I worked my way up. I watched what people did on film sets. I saw what everybody's role was. I understood what a grip was, what an electrician was, a gaffer was, what the makeup artist did, what the script supervisor, continuity person did. So I got to see all that and watch it and see different people do it, see how they did it. And it taught me a lot. So I had a pretty good fund of knowledge, so that by the time I got to working on bigger films, I already knew a fair amount. Now, one of the things I would say is that, my interest was not so much in the mechanics as in the story. I came from theater and story and acting. So to go into the nuts and bolts of it was the next thing I needed to learn. And that's what I learned when I was an AD.
Yeah.
But my interest was not being what you would call, quote, a line producer.
Yeah.
A line producer is usually somebody that a producer hires to manage the work. Well, I already knew the work, so I could be a line producer, but my interest was in being a line producer is not usually involved necessarily.
Like the financial stuff.
Yeah, but not necessarily involved in the writing and in the acting and in the creative side.
Yeah.
I wanted to be involved in the creative side. So, which is one of the reasons why being a director was a natural thought for me, and I did do a fair amount of that. But directing, it's a different challenge.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you really want to be involved in the whole process, being a producer is a good way to go, because you can, when I get involved, I generally will find a piece of material that I like. It may be given to me. It may be developed by me if it's a book, or even if it's an idea. I may take it to a writer and say, this is the thing, I want to turn this into a screenplay. and then I'll work with the writer. And that there are a lot of different ways.
The nice thing about producing is that if you position yourself right, you could technically take a different position if you wanted to.
Sure.
You could like, if you're really good at shooting and you want to be your own cinematographer,
there's no question
you could do that.
You could do all those things.
Might not be the best thing time management wise, but
that's the problem. The thing is, you what I find, and I can only speak from my own way of working, but I tend to like to find if I find a director who has a vision of the material that's similar or coherent and similar to what I think about it, then I may want them to do it. And so I'll hire that director and I'll support that director and the director's vision. Now, when the director is working almost entirely with the actors and on the script. Everything else has to be presented to them, kind of.
Yeah.
And the locations. Not to say that the director doesn't necessarily and isn't involved in picking them. He is, but somebody else has to do all of the legwork to find.
Give them the short list,
and they'll give them they'll take them out on the last 2 days and say, hey, we got 2 choices. Bang, I like that one, and then you're done.
Right.
And then so those are the things. A producer may be involved in all those other things.
Yeah.
But the director is going to be involved. What I used to say about directing and producing is directing is a very narrow vision, but very, very deep.
Yeah.
You're only involved in today's work. Yeah. You're only involved in the scene you're doing right now. That's these words, these actors, getting that performance. Yeah. That's what you want to do, and it's very deep. The producer, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's very. I would say that your
high level,
objective, right? No, but your objective is very thin, but very, very wide.
Yeah.
So you have to be thinking about tomorrow.
Yeah.
You don't want the director worried about what the location is going to be tomorrow. You have to get it prepared, have it ready, make sure all that happens so that when he or she gets on the set, they're ready to go. They don't have to think about that stuff. So you have to think about all that. You have to think about the contracts, making sure that the actor who arrives on the set is getting paid and all of those other things that the director doesn't want to deal with any of that and generally doesn't.
Right.
So the truth is, when you see on a movie, so it says produced and directed by, what it really means is that the individual is somebody who could name his own producer. It doesn't mean that they're actually, rarely does somebody do both those jobs. Mm-hmm. The producing director directs and produces by having people that he trusts or she trusts around him, and usually they're their own people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, decision making.
Anyway, you want to get back to
So I actually you said a couple of things that might tie us back there. A good story and hiring a good team and director. So you found this. Oh, by the way, is your babysitter a producer on The Elephant Man then?
No, my babysitter isn't, because my babysitter left long before, but that's the story which we should mention. I got the script for The Elephant Man from my babysitter. And I've already told you that story, but my babysitter basically asked me if I was an AD I was an assistant director. AD.
But she knew you were working.
She knew I was a working guy in the business. Yeah. She said, "Oh, my boyfriend wrote a script. Would you read it?" Yeah, sure, I'll read it. Everybody gets scripts, and everybody gets,
But it's funny, most people don't do that. Most people won't read their babysitter's
Well,
script.
that may be, but at the stage at which I was, which was very early in the process, I wasn't any major anything. I was basically an assistant director looking for a job, so I had nothing to lose by reading scripts. Nowadays, as a producer, if somebody brings me a script, I want a lawyer to look at it. I'm not sure I want to see it. I don't want to be sued. I'm always worried about that stuff. As an AD, I had nothing to lose. True. But the truth is, as you say, I was going on another job, so I put it down on my desk and I didn't read it. I just went off and did another job, and I was gone for 3 months. Mm-hmm. When I came back from the other job, I found this on my desk, and the babysitter wasn't even working for us anymore. She moved on. She now had a job as a teacher. And I remembered that she gave me the script. So I said, oh, man, I really wasn't very nice. I didn't read it. So I picked it up and I read it. And I was blown away by it. I thought it was great. It was not your typical 120-page script, which is 110, 120 pages is basically what the most scripts are.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're a little less, sometimes a little more, but the 2-hour movie is 120 pages.
Yeah.
A 90-minute movie is probably 90 to 110 pages.
Yeah.
You know, that's just how it works.
A page on average.
Something like that. Yeah. Well, in this case, it was a 200-page script, but it was a great story and it held my interest. And I was looking myself to move from being a below-the-line assistant director to becoming a producer. I thought, wow, this is a great story. Maybe I can get this made, not knowing how difficult it might be to do. So
Now, the AD job that you came off of, was that already a Mel Brooks job?
Yeah, that was a Mel Brooks film. I know. I just finished working with Mel Brooks when I got the script.
Yeah.
I read the script, and Mel called me up around the same time and asked me if I would do Fatso with Anne. So I said, sure, I can do that. In the meantime, while I'm prepping that, I had this great script. And
did you know about the John Merrick story before?
I knew nothing about it. But the funny thing was, my wife had, after I read it and said, wow, this is great. And she said, can I? I said, yeah, read it. So she read it. And she said, oh, I know about that. She had heard about the story. She knew about it. I didn't know anything about it.
Why did the writers choose that to write, you know?
They had read a book about Merrick, whose real name was Joseph Merrick, but nobody knew it at that time because the main book about him was a book called The Elephant Man and Other, it was called The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences, I think it was. But it was a book by Ashley Montague, who was an anthropologist, and he wrote a book about the character of the Elephant Man, who this guy had been. And these guys had read it, and they said, oh, that'd make a great script. And they wrote a script, and they both planned to be in it. One of them wanted to play the Elephant Man. Okay. The other one wanted to play the doctor. Well, when I got the script, I said, at that point, reality had set in. They came to LA, and they knew the chances of them getting a shot to play those major roles wasn't going to likely happen. But maybe the movie could get made. Right. So when I read it and I met with them, I basically said, look, I think this could be a major movie with major actors and a real, big thing.
And these were not screenwriters by trade.
They were guys who they'd been to film school, I guess, to some extent. Yes. Up in San Francisco, they had been, they both had, graduated college, but they were young guys. They were in their early 20s. But they had written this wonderful piece of material.
This was their first script?
This was the first, well, as far as I knew, it was the first script that they'd written. They may have written some other things before that, but I didn't know that. I just read it. Yeah. I said, look, it's long, it needs to be edited and all that, but it's a great story and a really very good script, and I would like to option it. And that was really how it began.
It seems like the best movies in history have stories like that, because I just recently saw an interview with Kevin Costner and how Dances with Wolves was written by some friend of his, and he just brushed it off, and the guy almost went bankrupt, and then he went and worked in some Chinese restaurant, and then he also kind of felt bad for him. It was years. He's like, gosh, I better read this damn script, and it was Dances with Wolves. He's like, I'm sorry I didn't read it earlier. Let's do
this is exactly how it works.
So Elephant Man, so they get you the script, you like it, you want to make a name for yourself. You know about 3 people in Hollywood. One of them happens to be a major player.
Yeah, but I didn't. I had not, in my wildest dreams, would I have brought the project to Mel to think of him as being involved in it. It was the last thing I knew Mel. I had done a comedy. Yeah. I'd done another comedy with his wife. He was only making comedies. He was going on to his next film, The History of the World, Part 2, whatever. Yeah.
Was Spaceballs out yet?
Spaceballs wasn't done yet. But and I was friendly with him all through that period. But he was doing comedy. So, why would I have even thought that this would have been something for him? Yeah. What happened was I was busy scouting locations with his wife, with Anne, and I had his assistant is a woman named Randy Auerbach, who was in his office, and she was a friend of mine, and in fact, I helped her get the job, and she'd been working for him for some time, and I had given her the script to read that I had optioned, and she liked it, and one day I was not there, but he was coming into the office, and it was on a Friday, and he was looking for something to read. he was a notorious insomniac. He needed something to read every night, So she said, "Oh, you should read this script. It's really good." So she gave him the script. He took it home. And I get a phone call the next day. And he says, "Hey," I was in New York. He was in LA. He calls me up and he says, "What is this?" So I said, "What is what?" He says, "Well, this script. I just read this script.
And your name's on
The
the
Elephant
front
Man." He
page,
says,
right?
"And I saw your name on it, and it has your phone number in it." I said, "Well, I optioned it, yeah." He said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Well, when you get back to Hollywood, tomorrow, whenever, let's get together and talk about it."
Let's pause there just because optioning is a term that maybe
Okay.
not everybody understands. And that's basically an agreement between yourself, a producer, and a writer to basically give you the option to the exclusive option to buy it
Someday.
and make the movie. But
Yeah.
it's more of a tentative kind of,
Yes.
maybe we'll do this.
Well, and the thing is, in almost every case, when you option something, you're going to assume that a bigger player, like a studio, you're going to take it to them with the project, maybe with a director, maybe with some actors, see if they're interested, and they will pick up the option. They will pay for the script and keep you attached to it. That's the whole
It's
idea.
called a package then.
Yeah,
when you come
by
in
that
with
time.
actors and
But
stuff.
optioning it is just, you never figure that you're going to option it and you are ultimately going to pay for it, because that's just unlikely to happen, and you're never going to have that kind of money. You could option something for a few $100s maybe,
Yeah.
or a few $1,000s, but to make the actual script and even pay for it,
Yeah.
to buy it is going to cost maybe $50,000 or $100,000. That's what, if you're dealing with major writers, for sure, and even if you're dealing with new writers, it's not going to cost much less than what Writers Guild scale is, which is what the Writers Guild lays out for a writer, and that's still going to be between $50,000 and $100,000. It's not going to be nothing.
Yeah.
So you got to find somebody after that, after you've optioned it, to basically be
Pick
willing
it
to
up.
put the money up.
Unless you want to go the modern kind of route with private equity.
Well, even
and
if
stuff,
you
but
want-
you're still finding the money.
Even if you go the modern route, at a certain point, you're going to have to put together a budget that is going to include in it the cost of the script, which you haven't paid.
That's right.
And you will, your option may go towards the cost. So let's say you put up $1,000 and the cost is $50,000, then you'll have to pay him $49,000 before you're, over the course of the movie, or before the movie gets started, whatever. So there are a lot of processes that you can do.
So you optioned the script. You heard from Mel that he read it and he wanted to talk to you.
And he meets me in LA and he says, "Look, I want to start a company to make movies other than my own comedies. And I love this story. And if you're interested, maybe we could do this together." Well, I went out dancing on the air.
Maybe.
I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. And I'm trying to figure out what do I do? And he said, "Look, before you do anything, let's sit down with your lawyer and my lawyer, and we'll figure out a plan." So I said, "Okay." And I left the room, and then I realized I don't have a lawyer. I got to find a lawyer. And I happen to again, it's all your contacts.
Yeah.
I had my kids went to a school in the San Fernando Valley, and I knew one of their friends' father was a lawyer in the entertainment business. So I called him up and I said, "Could you help me? Could you represent me in this deal?" And he took a look at it and he said, "Yeah. I said, I don't have any, I can't really pay you." He says, "Well, don't worry." He said, "You can, we'll make it a percentage deal where I'll get a percentage of what you get, which is not unusual."
Yeah, I was going to say that a lot of people shy away from using lawyers, but they, this probably should be known that they can work on a percentage deal, and if they believe in the project, they'll come on and they'll get a piece of the pie, and that can sometimes be worth it.
I have to tell you, this particular lawyer made a lot more money than he would have made if I had paid him.
Yeah,
because he wound up getting paid, a piece of the action all the way down the line, a little piece of my action.
Well, all you had to say was Mel Brooks is involved, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe
once he knew who it was, that was one of the reasons why he was willing to do it, because he felt that Mel Brooks' name attached to a project gave it a much better chance of getting made than my name just attached to it, which is obviously true at that time. So essentially, Mel was already a brand, but he was a brand in comedy, and even he knew that. But nevertheless, he was interested in making movies other than his own comedy. So that's really how we got started.
Huh. And then the process of making that, like now you're getting Anthony Hopkins, and actually, another choice that you made for the actor is an interesting one. Where initially, who was it that was like on top of the world right now that was very interested in the lead?
Dustin Hoffman.
Dustin Hoffman,
the lawyer, Mel Brooks's lawyer, a fellow by the name of Alan Schwartz, who was a pretty well-known lawyer.
May the Schwartz be with you.
Yeah, that comes literally from Alan.
Is that?
And Alan's in a couple of Mel's movies. I mean, you see him. He's this lawyer.
I love it when things come together.
No. That's definitely May the Schwartz be with you comes from Alan. And Alan was a lovely guy, but Alan was a lawyer, and Alan represented a lot of people in Hollywood. And once Mel, said, "Hey, Alan, we're going to make this, and Jonathan's going to produce it, and I'm going to help him, and we're going to get this thing made." Mel didn't want his name attached to it because he was smart enough to understand that if his name was on it at that time in 1979, people were going to assume it was, especially a movie named The Elephant Man. Everyone would assume it was a comedy. He said, "I can't do that. So I'm not going to have my name on it, but I'm starting a new company, and the new company," and he and I talked about this a lot. And the new company, he said, will be called Brooks Films. No one will know, it doesn't have to have my name attached as an executive producer, but, you'll produce it.
Yeah.
I'm going to produce it, and I'll be here in Hollywood. I trust you.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it got going. But Alan was the lawyer, and Alan also represented Dustin Hoffman. And he said, I was talking to Dustin, and Dustin heard that there's this project called The Elephant Man, and I told him a little bit about it, and he was fascinated by it, and he really would be interested in playing the Elephant Man. It's an amazing role. And Mel, I have to say, is an extremely smart guy and understands commerce, understands art. He understands the whole thing. And it was a situation where he could see there was something bothering me. And he said, "What's the matter?" He says, "You've got a movie. It's a new movie. You're going to get to produce it. Maybe Dustin Hoffman's going to be in it. This is cool." And I said, "Yeah, but I think it's a mistake." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, Dustin Hoffman is so well known that this is a guy who's deformed. His whole face is deformed and everything. You're always going to be looking for Dustin Hoffman. It's going to take you out of the movie. I didn't think it was a good idea." And he, strangely enough, because if Dustin Hoffman hadn't been connected to it at that point, it would have probably automatically got us a deal at a major studio to finance the picture. Right. But Mel said, "You're right." He said, I believe you're right. He said, "No, we need to go with the very best actor we can, but not somebody that everybody knows." And
now that was a
big step.
But that was the smart thinking on your part. Like I guess there's no good way to figure out what triggered that savvy in your brain.
I'll give you an example. Many years later, I'm trying to think, the movie Frankenstein that was made, the latest version of Frankenstein was made by Kenneth Branagh. Kenneth Branagh made it. And the Frankenstein monster was played by what's his name? My brain is fading.
I should know. I should probably know.
No. De Niro.
Yeah. Okay.
Robert De Niro played
Frankenstein.
He played Frankenstein. Now, I saw the movie many years later, and if anything, it just proved to me that I was 100% right. Because when I watched the film, I could not ever forget that the monster was Robert De Niro.
Right.
It wasn't Frankenstein. It was Robert De Niro playing Frankenstein.
Right.
And it took me right out of the movie. And I think it took a lot of people out because the movie was not a big success. That was the only thing that was a problem, but that was certainly an issue.
It's an odd choice regardless. Because, De Niro was very kind of specific.
Well, you would have thought that, but he's bald in the movie, and he's he bulked up a little bit, so physically he was big, but it just made no sense.
Yeah.
It made no sense whatsoever. Even if his performance was perfect, you couldn't forget who he was, and the fame of him as a character wouldn't work. Now with Elephant Man, John Hurt wasn't that guy. Was not a very well known guy. We had seen him. We'd seen him in a couple of movies. He was in the movie that really sold us on him was a movie called The Naked Civil Servant, which was a movie he did in England for the BBC, and he played a real character who was this gay, flamboyant guy who was nothing at all like John Hurt, and he was so good. He was so interesting and so good that we said, "Oh, this guy really has the chops to do it," and so we were interested. And he was not an unknown actor. He had just gotten an Academy nomination for a movie that he had done the previous year. So he was already.
Now, is this before or after David Lynch is on this project?
No, David Lynch. By the time we went to get John Hurt, David was already on it.
Did he agree with you on the?
Well, David's initial feeling was David wanted the guy who had played the lead, Jack Nance, who played the lead in Eraserhead.
Okay.
Now, Jack Nance is not a bad actor.
He wanted to get his own people.
But he wanted his own people.
Yeah.
And Mel and I both thought, no, we don't think that's a good idea. You need to step out of your comfort zone and you need to look at other people.
So how this producer-director relationship, how do you make decisions if like David Lynch was vehemently opposed to something and you were vehemently opposed to a creative choice of his? How do you settle those differences?
Well, you try to come to some common ground always. At least I do. I mean, I don't believe in dictating one to the other what it's got to be, because it never works. That's not really a good thing. So the idea was I wanted to make sure David understood my point of view, and Mel also needed to understand where David was coming from. So, but you have to understand, directors and producers are always involved in it's a power dynamic. And there are directors who are very powerful and producers who are not so powerful, working for some of those directors. And then there are producers who are extremely powerful, who basically tell the directors what they can and can't do. We weren't in that situation. Neither David and I were in a power position. I mean, he was a brand new director, relatively.
One movie.
Right. I had never produced anything, but I had a background in film, so at least I knew the process. The power was all in Mel's hands, because Mel could could be the arbiter of any discussion.
He's kind of the tiebreaker.
So he would say, if we had a discussion that David wanted to, was thinking about, I mean, he wasn't adamant that it had to be Jack Nance, but he would have liked that at that time.
Yeah.
And Mel was serious, and he said, look, you have to understand, we're making a commercial movie. We need actors that have some value. And not that the actor who played
Eraser.
No, the actor who played John Hurt or Joseph Hurt, excuse me, not John Hurt, John Merrick or Joseph Merrick had to be a major star. But having somebody who had some big background in performing was helpful. And John Hurt did. And we were going to look for a major actor to play the doctor, who was the other major character in the piece.
And so then how does Hopkins come in?
So Hopkins was somebody we all respected. Mel basically had told us, Anthony Hopkins is the guy who should do this. He's the best actor in the world. And he'd been doing movies in England, and beautiful, incredible movies. And he definitely was somebody we thought about. He wasn't the only one. I mean, we thought about other actors who might be good.
What were a couple of your choices?
You mean of other actors?
Yeah,
Alan Bates was a possible guy.
Okay,
Alan Bates had been a pretty successful actor and had done some big movies at that time. Mm-hmm. So, at that time, he was probably in the same category and we needed an English actor.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted so we were looking at specifically English actors. There was a few, but not a whole lot. And Anthony Hopkins was the best. But when I went to his agent to ask him about doing it, his agent immediately dismissed it and said, no, he's not interested. I said, how do you know? He said, well, I'm not even going to give it to him. I said, well, why? He said, well, because, I mean, he didn't say it in so many words, but he basically said, look, Anthony has been doing these period movies, and he's done all of these, interesting movies. He wants to do more commercial films, and we have a deal for him to do a movie called A Change of Seasons with Bo Derek and Shirley MacLaine, and we're not interested in having him go back and do English movies. We want to do kind of more international American type movies.
That's the agent talk.
That's the agent.
I want more money.
That's the agent. Right. So what really happened was that Hopkins was in a play in L.A., somewhere in L.A., and the two writers, who by that time were part of our team, said, hey, we're going to go see that play. So they went to see the play and somehow got the script to Hopkins privately. Hopkins read the script and told his agent he wanted to do it. The truth is, and I can't say this for a fact, but I think it had a lot to do with it. Very soon after Hopkins decided to do The Elephant Man, he fired his agent. He got a new agent because he realized he was because he found out that the agent had already seen it. The agent said, and the agent had turned it down without him even knowing.
I hear that a lot. I hear now agents don't even have the courtesy to tell you that they're not sending it. They're just saying, okay, we'll look at it, and then they just don't get back to you. Yeah. But I hear this more often than not, that agents just kind of gatekeep and make decisions.
Well, this was one of those situations where there was a couple of we had one big advantage in that we had Mel Brooks behind us, and Mel Brooks was a known entity. Even though he was a known entity in comedy, he was known, and he could get into doors that we ourselves couldn't get into. So that when we pitched the story, once we had David Lynch, and that's another story for another day. Once we got David Lynch, we wound up going to major studios. It was only because Mel Brooks made the call to Paramount or to Universal or to Fox that they would take. They wouldn't have taken my call. They took his call, and he and I would go in, and we'd have a meeting, and he would he's a great salesman, and he knew how to sell.
Yeah.
And he sold me. He said, this is the best producer in the world. He would tell them, he'd tell this to Michael Eisner and, people like that. He said, no, he's great, and he's going to produce it, and I'm behind it, and David Lynch is going to direct it, and he's the most brilliant director. And, and he really was a great salesman, and that's kind of how we got started.
The first-time director, David Lynch, has a weird-ass movie called Eraserhead that's out. Like, totally different genre, not anything like The Elephant Man. Why, in your head, is this a good fit?
Well, it wasn't. I'm not going to say that I immediately thought David Lynch was the right guy to do this. I was fascinated by David Lynch, totally apart from The Elephant Man.
Just because of his
crazy way I had heard about him. And Stuart Kornfeld, who worked for Mel, who was Mel's assistant at the time, had met David because Stuart used to work at the American Film Institute, and met David there. And so I wound up talking to Stuart. Stuart was a friend of mine, and I said, geez, I'd love to meet David. So he said, I can arrange a meeting. And so he gave me David's number or whatever, and we set up a meeting, and David and I had coffee together at Bob's Big Boy in Santa Monica Boulevard. And we go over and we sit down and we are talking about stuff. I said, what are you doing? He asked me what I'm doing. He's doing a movie called Ronnie Rocket that he's trying to put together, and he doesn't have anybody. I mean, he's only made one movie, and he's made it, it's Eraserhead, and it's not yet it hadn't become the success that it later became, but it was starting to get shown and people were hearing about it. So it was unusual. And he asked me what I was doing, and I said, I'm doing this thing. It's The Elephant Man. He said, oh, The Elephant Man. He loved the sound of it.
Sure.
So he said, could I read it? I said, sure. Can I read Ronnie Rocket? He said, yeah. So we traded, we arranged to trade scripts, and he sent me his script or gave me his script, and I gave him a copy.
Did you actually read it?
I did.
You did?
Oh, I absolutely did.
Yeah.
No. In fact, later, after The Elephant Man, I was tied to David, and I were going to produce that movie with at Francis Ford Coppola's company. Never happened because Coppola went bankrupt and a lot of crazy things happened.
Switched to wine.
But that was at a time when it looked like it might happen.
Okay. But he obviously read your script.
But he read my
obviously.
script, called me up and immediately said, I love this.
Now, how long did it take for you to get that phone call from that meeting? Was it
probably a week?
A week, yeah. Maybe
a week, not even. So he said, let's meet again. Let's have coffee again. So we did. We had another cup of coffee at another Bob's Big Boy situation. And he said, let me tell you what I think about it. And then he started talking to me about his ideas about the film. And I liked what he had to say. I thought he was very, very astute. He felt that it needed a rewrite, and he wanted to help the rewrite.
What did that mean to him? Like, what was if you had to pick one thing that was wrong with it, what did he want to kind of redo?
Well, I think basically he wanted to put some dreams into it. He wanted to put some of his own imaginative thinking into it, which the original script was pretty much a straight through. It's a biopic in a pretty straight way, and he wanted to add some elements to it and edit it, but he wanted to do it not separate from the writers. He wanted to do it with the original writers if they got along. And so I introduced him to the writers, and they hit it off immediately.
How different do you think the script is from the original?
Very different.
Yeah.
When I say very different, I mean it was too long. There were a lot of scenes which we eliminated that we didn't need. But in general, many of the scenes from the original script are exactly what we shot. So it wasn't, it wasn't that different, but what it did, the opening was different. Anything that had to do with really things that were outside of the imagination of the writers in terms of what the character might have been feeling and thinking as opposed to what he was doing, David helped bring in, and that was a big step. I mean, it added a lot, even in a little way.
That's cool. Yeah.
Even in little ways. I mean, we had.
So they wrote it very practically and
for example, there's the whole idea of the Elephant Man, how he became to be, was the myth of it. Even in the story, was that his mother had been watching a parade and had been struck by an elephant as she was walking, and when she had a child, the child had this deformity. Well, of course, that was not what happened, but David decided that might have been what the child Elephant Man character might have thought from hearing that so much that he made a dream sequence in the opening that shows that happening, shows an Elephant Man hitting his mother, and that kind. I mean, stuff that was not in there originally.
That's cool.
So it was that kind of stuff was
adds layers.
Yeah, it added many layers. And I mean, there were other little things I could think of that David brought in because, that were there. The ideas were there. For example, the notion that nobody in the hospital could have a mirror. So that they didn't want him to see himself. They didn't want, when he was taken to the hospital, they felt he was looking at other people, seeing what they looked like. And they didn't want him to see himself because it might frighten him. That was their idea. So the notion of not having mirrors was already in the script, but David kind of added a level to it. And when somebody does bring a mirror to show him what he looks like, he screams and is frightened, and he becomes totally frightened, and that was part of David adding that.
So it puts a lot of importance on that one moment as opposed to having little mirrors everywhere. Yeah, that's really cool. So then, how do you sell? So, two-part question:
Sure.
Who ends up funding this, and then how did you get that entity or person to actually get behind you and David Lynch? I mean, Mel Brooks, of course, but still, the director is a big deal. And if all he's ever done is Eraserhead, I would find that's very difficult for an executive to kind of wrap their head around.
That's true. But the thing is, again, remember the power of an important party makes a tremendous amount of difference. You can't make that kind of thing happen. Mel went to Paramount, and we met with Michael Eisner and Barry Diller. It was actually Michael Eisner was Mel sent Michael Eisner the script. Michael and Barry were the co-heads of Paramount at that time. Michael Eisner's wife read the script, and he told Mel, my wife cried when she read it. So that immediately meant that he had a connection to it. But nevertheless, it was an unusual movie and not an easy movie to sell, and about a deformed man and all of the things that we wanted to do. And Mel, being Mel, said, look, I'm not interested in you financing the movie. I just want you to distribute the movie domestically, which was very unusual.
Yeah.
Because he said, we're going to get it financed. And, initially we took no money from Paramount. We made a deal with them. And the deal was that they would distribute the film, but not that they would finance it. So later, when we needed money, we went back to Paramount, and they gave us some money to help us.
When finishing?
We didn't have all we needed. But Mel put up some of his own money, and we got an advance against foreign distribution from EMI, which was another connection through Mel. So he was really totally responsible with getting the movie funded. And the final piece of that movie was NBC Television at the time was buying movies of the week. And the head of NBC Television was a man by the name of Fred Silverman. Now, Fred was about to leave NBC at that time, but he was a pretty interesting and very creative head of business affairs type, but he ran NBC, and he could make the decision to buy or not buy a film. And he said, look, Mel came in and Mel pitched it. And Mel, as I said, it was a great picture. And he said, look, Mel, I like it. I'll do it. I'll pre-buy it and we'll put it on. I'll give you, for the movie, when it's done and everything else, $4 million. And we agreed $2 million up front, but there's a catch. So Mel said, all right, what's the catch? He says, you have to do a comedy special for NBC sometime in the future. So, we'll pay you for it separately. It won't be tied into the money for this, but we want to contract you that you will do a future comedy special for NBC. Mel thought about it, and he said, okay, I'll do it. So we signed the deal. We got $2 million, which was well on the way to getting all the money we needed at the time. The movie wound up costing about $5 million, but the initial budget was about $4.2 million.
In 83, 82?
In 1979, 80.
79, that's when you started, okay.
Now, the reason that wound up to $5 million was because the currency exchange between the dollar and the pound kind of changed, not in our favor, and we were in dollars, so we wound up losing a little. But still, it was not terribly expensive. If you think that the same year a movie like Raging Bull was made, and that cost maybe $15 million, maybe $16 million in the same year. So our number was not
crazy because what you pulled off for that budget is insane. That kind of a period.
Those were the days when, it was, we were I think we were very creative in the way that we did it. A lot of that is, again, there's a lot of detail. I could explain it to you, but I think we'd be spending hours.
We'll do a secondary spin-off. Yeah.
But there is a lot that went into it that was very smart about how we did it. But essentially, Fred Silverman made the deal, and privately Mel told me, he says, look, Fred's leaving NBC. He said, I'm never doing a special. I'm never going to do a special for him. I said, really? Yeah. He said, yeah, I don't think so. He says, I'm going to be too busy.
Yeah.
And we never made a date when it had to happen.
Right.
And by the time the movie came out and the movie was ready to go, they were so happy with the movie because they didn't know what they were going to get. Yeah. And the movie was nominated for 8 Academy Awards. So now NBC had a movie that had 8 nominations
already on
They-
the roster. They got to cheat. They got a good deal.
Nobody pushed Mel to make the comedy special that week. They said,
Yeah.
all right, forget it. Not now, later. And it never happened.
So this was a deal for after theatrical release would have run its course. Then it goes to television, movie of the week. That's cool.
That's right. But the thing is, in those days, that was the only, and there weren't any other ancillary markets. There were cassettes, but it wasn't a big market. There were no DVDs yet.
Yeah.
There were no DVDs. There were foreign sales were just beginning. The bulk of sales were in the U.S. Although that movie we knew it would have a good run in England because it was an English story, and it did.
Yeah.
But that was it.
But you weren't looking at European territories outside of the UK yet.
No, no, we weren't.
And okay, so this is obviously before NBC and Universal became a thing, because this is way before, because Paramount's distributing this, and then it goes.
Paramount's distributing it domestically only.
Yeah.
So they didn't own anything foreign. Mel was very smart about this, which is another aspect for, if we do a special piece on the business of film that's just about how things work. Mel was very clear that he didn't want the movie cross-collateralized. Now, you have to understand what that means. Usually, when a major studio owns a movie worldwide, they release it in the U.S., they release it in England, they release it in France, in every territory that they release it in, is a sub-market. It's a sub-distributor. If the movie loses in that market, they write it off against the territories that made money. Mm-hmm. So, so they look at it as a worldwide thing. It made, the movie makes $50 million in the U.S., but loses $20 million foreign. They consider that the movie made then $30 million overall, because they write off the bad bits against the good ones. Sure. Now, what did Mel know? He knew if they only had domestic distribution, they only have domestic distribution to make money from. They're not going to make money foreign because they don't own that. So you separate them. So if they make $50 million domestically, they've got to give you your share of that $50 million.
Oh, yeah.
And you worry about what's going to happen foreign. That's so Mel said, let's sell each territory separately.
Yeah.
Well, it was too early to do. That's what people do today. And that's basically the way independent films are financed in a large way.
So you're kind of doing something pretty unprecedented at that time. You're self-funding a movie, retaining the full rights to it, and just leveraging studios for distribution, which even now is hard to do with studios, but you were doing
It's exactly right. I can't think of another movie at that time that was done in that way. I think it was really a harbinger of what was going to happen in the business 30 years later, 40 years later, because independent films didn't really exist there weren't very many independent films that were made. And if they were tiny little films. We were independent, but knowing that we had a major studio behind us, and the major studio cared about the film enough to make sure that the film
It is kind of a win-win, because they don't have to stake their money on a potentially disastrous thing where you're getting some crazy director and a first-time producer involved. But at the same time, if it does work out, they get the benefits of it.
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And they made and Mel also made what I would consider to be a very wise deal that I don't imagine would have been an easy thing to happen. And this, again, goes to the business side of it. Normally, when you make a film and you sell it to Paramount, for example, or any major distributor, they wind up taking a distribution fee. Mm-hmm. That distribution fee comes off the top. That's the first money that comes back. And the distribution fee for a film that they just buy could be anywhere between 25 and 30%. I mean, they get they get it right off the top. So, they're sharing before the movie's even had a chance to recoup anything.
Yeah.
Well, Mel was offered a different kind of a deal with them. They said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will, because Mel this is his thinking, and I'll try to explain this to you, see if it makes sense. But he said, you want the domestic studio that is distributing the film to push it as hard as they can. What's going to make them do that? Well, normal deals are they get 25%, whatever the percentage is, but They get 25% when they release the film. Once the film is made $10 million, they'll drop their fee to 20%. And when it goes up higher, they'll drop it maybe to 50. They'll go down to a floor, to a bottom. The bottom maybe 20% or 15%, whatever that is. Well, Mel said, yeah, but if you do that, they have no incentive to push the movie because they get all their money early.
Sure.
So he said, I got a better idea. And he said, what if we say to them, no, we will do this for 15% until the movie makes 10 million. Then you go up.
So he's flipped it.
He's flipped it, which meant that if the movie was an enormous hit, Paramount's going to make a lot more money.
A lot of money, because that's
if the movie is a modest hit, at least we're going to get paid.
That's amazing.
So and really they agreed to it. Now that was a very unusual model. Nobody else was doing that kind of thing. And Paramount went for it. They said, okay, we'll do that. And it made them, so the more the movie made, the higher their percentage. So they were pushing for the movie to make more money.
Eisner's no slouch when it comes to business either. So I think that's probably.
I mean, it was early in his studio executive career, whereas I don't know if he would have done that 5 years later, even.
Especially now when he went to Disney, probably.
Yeah, but Mel was very persuasive and was able to do a lot to get that movie to a place that it did well. Now, as you said, unusually, the movie is not owned by a major studio. It's owned by Brooks Films. That's the company that still owns the movie. So if the movie gets a second run, Brooks Films gets paid.
Do you know how much money it made?
I know that initially it made about $75 million worldwide, maybe a little more. It didn't make enormous numbers.
10x the investment.
But it made pretty good. Yeah,
it will make the investor happy.
It did pretty well. Oh, it definitely did well. And everybody who had a percentage of it made money.
And I know you got to run here soon, but it was a financial success. This is your first movie. I just like this story. It's David Lynch's first real movie, essentially. Not that Eraserhead wasn't a real movie, but with real actors, big thing. It went off to be a commercial success. The makeup we can get into another time, because that alone was a whole feat of engineering. But then he gets to the Academy Award. It actually gets to the Academy Awards with your first picture. Doesn't win any, though, but gets nominated for every single category.
Almost every category,
right? Yeah. What was the reason you didn't get an Oscar for that film?
Well, I think there's a number of things. It was a tough year, got to say. I mean, we were up against some very heavy competition. We were up against Raging Bull. We were up against Tess. We were up against, which was Roman Polanski's movie. We were up against another picture from the same studio, from Paramount, which was the one that won, which was Ordinary People. We weren't nominated for cinematography, which made absolutely no sense, because the cinematography is the only major category that we weren't nominated in for some odd reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
And there was no makeup award at all. As a result of people talking about the makeup, the very next year, the Academy added a makeup award on the basis of the fact that The Elephant Man was such a big deal.
They should have retroactively.
Yeah, well, they didn't. So there were we didn't get any awards. Now, I think Ordinary People did. Ordinary People won for a Best Picture, and I think De Niro won for Best Actor for Raging Bull. But I think, a lot of the major awards were won by the big studio pictures.
Yeah.
And I think if you looked at this in retrospect now, this is just my opinion, but I think Elephant Man is a better picture than Ordinary People. But, it was nominated, and that we were thrilled to be nominated in all those categories. We won in England. We won Best Film in England for in the BAFTA Awards. Yeah. We won Best Foreign Film in the French in the César Awards. Yeah. So we got plenty of awards.
It was an awarded film. Yeah. Well, I have my opinion about the Academy selections.
Well,
and stuff, so.
Of course, but we all do.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was cool.
Okay.
Let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, we're going to do this regularly.
We'll talk about more stuff.
Other things.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and listen to us talking about more stuff next time.
Yeah, let's do it. Amen.
All right, man.
Great pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks. while we were doing Elephant Man, Mel Brooks came to me and the writers. He says, look, it all worked out for Elephant Man. We're moving along. This is great. Let's do something else. What do you guys want to do? And I said, well, we do have another project about this actress named Frances Farmer.